Zachas Kiddushin Daf Samach Vez concludes the Gemara's discussion of the subject of Tanai Kafel. Do you need a Tanai Kafel like Bnei Gad and Beiruvin? And we'll begin with another Mishnah that introduces the new sugya of what happens when a Kiddushin was performed under mistaken circumstances. So the Gemara has been discussing had a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, whether when you make a Tanai, if you have to say both ways, if yes, then this, and if not, then that, or do you just have to say one, and from the yes, you imply the no, or from the no, you imply the yes. So the Gemara is going to bring two more proofs on the subject. The Gemara's first proof is actually proof to Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, who holds you don't have to say it, you don't have to repeat it, you don't have to say both sides. And this proof is from the shvua that a saita makes, the kohen makes the saita swear. Now there are two different shvuas that she makes. She makes a shvua where he says, if you did not lie with a man besides your husband, then you'll be clean from this shvua. And then afterwards, there's a separate shvua that says, and if you did, then there will be a klal, there will be the curse that will happen. But there are two separate things, and the first one doesn't have a repeat. It doesn't say each side, and therefore it only really says one side. It says, if you didn't lie, then you will be clean. It doesn't say, and if you did lie, then you will receive the curse that's involved. The Gemara phrases it as the expression that it says in the pasuk is im lo yishachav hinaki. It should have said v'im shachav chinaki, that you'll be choked. So why is that not there? So the Gemara answers that it is implied from the fact that there is a missing yud in the word hinaki. That is there for you to make a gzeira, to make a drasha, and to link it to the klala that comes later. And say, just like the next klala, we say the negative side, here also you say the negative side. You don't just imply it from the positive side. Now, the Gemara therefore says we have a kasha now on Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, the missing yud there for that drasha, links it that you do say both sides. Why do you have to say both sides? According to him, you only have to say one, you don't have to say Tanai Kafel. So the Gemara says you have to say that if you are innocent, it will be good, and if you are not innocent, if you're guilty, it will be bad. Just so you shouldn't think that if you're guilty, it will be nothing. You won't get the bracha, but you won't get a koli either. There you have to say that it'll be either way. It'll be as far as that. Okay, now the Gemara's next kasha is on Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. Let's write to Rabbi Meir that you do have to say Tanai Kafel, and this is from the way the Torah expresses the mitzvah of sprinkling paradum water on someone who's tamei mace to be metaharim, and it says you should sprinkle it on the tamei mace on the third day and on the seventh day of his tahara, and if you don't, then he won't become tahar. So that sounds like we're saying a Tanai Kafel. It sounds like we're saying both sides. According to Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, you shouldn't have to do that. So the Gemara answers over here. It means to say that you have to the chiddush that it needs to teach me is that you have to do both the third day and the seventh day. You may think if it would just say sprinkle on the third day and on the seventh day, that you could do either of those days. The third day is available, the seventh day is available, either one's fine. You have to say, no, if you don't sprinkle both, he will not become tahar. You have to stress the negative side of it. Now, the Gemara asks, now that we know that you have to do the 2 days, it's a bit extra repetitive, and this kasha is on everybody, that it is repeated in the Torah. When it says v'hiza hatar alatam v'yom hashlishi v'yom hashvi, you should sprinkle on both days. Why is that said again? So Moshe says that's to teach that it has to be day 3 and day 7. I understand it can't be day 3 and day 6, or it can't be day 2 and day 6, because you are minimizing the days of tahara. You have to have 3 days of tahara before you sprinkle the first time, and then you have to have another 3 days before you can sprinkle the next time. That I understand. But you may think that if you make more days of tahara, that's fine. You may think that if you do day 3 and day 8, so you had an extra day, so that would be okay. Therefore, I needed to say day 3 and day 7 only, and you can't play with that. Now, the Gemara follows up with, then why does it have to say again, v'chita b'yom hashvi? You should sprinkle on day 7. You just clarified for me, it could only be on day 7. So Gemara says you may think that that's only for karbonos that he has to have sprinkled on day 7, but for truma, either of the 2 days would be fine, and therefore it has to say in that those psukim are discussing truma, it has to specify that you need to have both of them, 3 and 7. Okay, that concludes this sugya, and now we get our next mishnah, which has 2 sugyas. The first is that of if the husband thought something and it wasn't true, is the Kiddushin void? And the second one is, can you make a Kiddushin which is in a situation where it's not Taifis, but you say that it should be Chal later at a time when it could be Taifis? Does that work? So first, the Mishnah discusses if somebody's Makadesh a woman. She didn't say anything, but he thought certain factors which weren't true. And for example, he thought that she was a Kohenes, her father was a Kohen, and it turns out that she's a Leviah. Or the opposite, he thought she was a Leviah, and turns out she is a Kohenes. Or about her finances, he thought she was poor, and it turns out she's rich. Or he thought she was rich, and it turns out that she's not rich, she's poor. All these circumstances, she is Mekadesh, the Kiddushin is valid, because she didn't fool him. He thought, so he thought. That's not a Tanai that he made, and therefore the Kiddushin is okay. Now, next sugya is where he gives her Kiddushin that couldn't be Chal now, but he's saying it should be Chal later at a time when it will be fine. So if, for example, he is a guy or she is a guy, and he says, here's Kiddushin which should be Chal after I convert or after you convert, or he's an Eved or she's a Shivcha, and he says, after I'm freed or after you're freed, or she's an Eishes Ish, and he says, this Kiddushin should be Chal after your husband dies, or if she is an Achos Ishto, she is his wife's sister, which is forbidden as long as he's still married to the sister. And he gives Kiddushin, and he says it should be Chal when your sister dies. Those are all invalid because there's no Tfisa Kiddushin at that time. Now, if she is Zakak to Yibum, so this kind of holds there is no Tfisa Kiddushin on a Yavama Lashuk, that is a Yavama who has to wait for Yibum or Chalitza, and he gives it to her and says, after you get Chalitza, this Kiddushin should be Chal. Also no good according to this Tana. And same thing is if it's a child who isn't born yet. So you can't give Kiddushin to a father and say, here, this is Kiddushin for your daughter who's soon to be born. If your wife gives birth to a female, she's Mekudeshes with this Kiddushin. That is not valid. The reason for that is that the fetus is not considered to be a viable child that exists in the world at this time. We now begin the Gemara, and the Gemara has a kasha on our Mishnah that it contradicts a different sugya in Maseches Truma. So over there it speaks about what happens if somebody wants to separate Truma from fruits that are already harvested, already cut from the ground, on fruits that are still attached to the ground. Now, the halacha is that fruits that while they are attached to the ground are not chayiv in Truma, and Truma does not take effect on them. So if somebody separates Truma from fruits that are chayiv in Truma, that is because they've already been detached from the ground, on fruits which are connected, it's not chal the Truma, and all of it is tevel, it remains tevel. When you harvest the mechubarim, they remain tevel, because the Truma that was taken from them is not valid, and the Truma that you took is also not Truma, and if you give it to the Kayan, it is invalid Truma, and it's tevel, and he has to find a way to be metakin it himself, either by being marfish on something else, or by being marfish part of it. Now, this Mishnah says that if someone has a row and he says, hey, the already cut fruits in this row are truma on the not cut fruits in the row after I separate it. It means he takes truma now and he says, after we cut that truma, after we cut those fruits from the ground, this truma that I'm taking now should be chal. So the Mishnah there says that works. And it works because it's within his power to cut it whenever he wants, and therefore it's considered like it's already cut. It's not an obstacle to the fact that it's not cut yet, and because he says that this truma should be chal when I will cut those, it is good. So the question is, in our Mishnah, we saw all these things where the Kiddushin can't be chal, even though he says it should be chal at a later time when it'll be okay. Now, the Truma's Mishnah had specified because it's within his power to cut them. In our Mishnah, most of the things are not within the power of the Mekadesh. He can't kill off the husband, the sister, or any of those things. What he can do, though, is be Megayer. So if he's a guy and he wants to give Kiddushin and say that this should take effect when I am a Megayer, why is that no good? It is biyadi, it's within his ability to convert whenever he wants. So Rabbi Yochanan answers it's not within his ability because it requires a beis din. You need 3 people to see the gerus make it valid. Who says he'll find 3 people that are willing to do that? Conversion is called a mishpat, and just like a mishpat in monetary issues requires a court, this requires a court as well. So on that, the Gemara has a follow-up kasha, but what would be in the case of a man freeing his shifcha? So let's say he owns a shifcha and he gives Kiddushin to her, and he says, this Kiddushin should be chal when I free you. So there he doesn't need a beis din, he can just free her whenever he wants. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, that would be a valid Kiddushin? So the Gemara answers no. There, she's not in a state at all. She's a shivcha. A shivcha is like a behema. She has no das of her own. You can't say that she will be roy afterwards. It's very different than the truma where it's valid, just can't take effect in that moment. Here, the maisa of giving kiddushin to a shivcha is meaningless. He can't say it'll take effect when she becomes freed. So the Gemara has a different kasha on that. So the Gemara says we'll be in a situation where he's married to a woman and he gives her kiddushin. And now he can't give kiddushin to a woman you're married to, but he says, I'm going to divorce you soon, and this kiddushin should be chal after I divorce you. So Rabbi Yechon will say that would work because it's biyadei. He has the ability to divorce her whenever he wants, and therefore the kiddushin is chal afterwards. So the Gemara says no, because even though he has the ability to be megarisher, he doesn't have the ability to be mekadesher. So who says that kiddushin will work? Maybe she won't agree to that kiddushin. So the Gemara says, if that's true, we should be able to resolve a question that was asked elsewhere by Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi asked, if a man gives a random woman who he's not married to, he gives her 2 prutas for kiddushin. He says, one should take effect now. The other one should take effect after I divorce you. So is that second kiddushin chal or not? So we should see from here that second kiddushin is not chal, because we said we don't view it as biyadai. We say that it's no good. So why is there a tzad there? Why is Rav Ashi not sure whether or not it is chal? So the answer is no, because here at the moment he's giving it to her, he could give her kiddushin. He's not married to her yet. Our question is where at the moment that he gives it to her, he can't give kiddushin. There's no tvisa to it, and he's saying it should be chal later. But over there, it could be chal now, and it could be chal later as well. And the Gemara now continues by bringing a brisa that says, like Rabbi Yechanan, that you can separate, and it should be chal on something which is biyadai, which is in your ability. And then the Gemara is going to bring an opinion that argues and says even if it's not biyadai. So first of all, we see a brisa that truma works only if it is in your biyadai, if it is in your ability to make it be bitolush. So the brisa says that if somebody separates from connected on not connected, or from connected or from not connected on connected, neither one is chal. However, if he separates from not connected on connected, and it should be chal when I will disconnect it, then it is chal. And again, apparently, like Rabbi Yechanan said, because it is biyadai. Then we have Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, who says that it's a step further, and even if it's not biyadai. What's that? So that's referring to, again, you have connected on not connected, or not connected on connected is not chal. But if he has not connected, already detached, he wants to separate it on connected, which didn't grow, not fully grown, it's only chayv and truma once it's grown a third of its growth. So if he says before it grow a third, if he says when it'll grow a third, which is not in his ability to make that happen, it's not biyadai, but he says when it'll grow a third and I will harvest it, should be chal. At that moment, according to Rav Elazar ben Yaakov, that's good too, even though it's not biyadai. Now the Gemara quotes in Machlokes, how much does the growth have to be? So Rabbi says it has to be what we call shachas, but it's grown enough that the plant is there and possibly some of the flowering is there, and you can actually harvest it and feed it to animals. So it has some value, and because it has some value, you can have something bichal on it to take effect at a later time. Rav Yosef says it could even be what he calls agam, meaning that it's not grown at all. So now the Gemara says, where do you see the word agam means not grown? So Gemara quotes a pasuk in Sefer Yeshaya from the Haftarah of Yom Kippur that we just read recently, where it says halachayv agmain roshai, halachayv meaning to bend over, and agmain, that's like the word agam. So you see, agam means something which is tall enough to actually bend over, to curve, as opposed to something which is not fully grown at all. Now, the Gemara says this will fit each according to his opinion with our brisa, which reflects the last case in our Mishnah. The brisa discusses somebody wants to be mekadesh a child which isn't born yet, so he gives kiddushin to the father and says it should be chal when your daughter is born. So there, the brisa says it's invalid, the kiddushin is no good, and Rabbi Chanina says that's referring to where the woman is not pregnant yet. If she's pregnant already, then the kiddushin is valid. So what stage of pregnancy is that? So the Gemara says that would work in this machlokes for Rabbah and Rav Yosef. According to Rabbah, that it has to be grown to some extent. It has to be grown enough that the child is visible, that her pregnancy is visible, and therefore it is considered to be in the world to some extent, just like the shachas. Rav Yosef would say even if it's lehuk or uber, even if she's pregnant at this point, we know that she is pregnant, but there is no visible external signs of the pregnancy. Now, the Gemara brings a different version of the machlokes Rabbah and Rav Yosef. According to this version, neither of them holds that agam is good. They both agree that you have to have shachas, you have to have the stage at which it could be harvested and fed to animals. question is, what type of shachas field are we referring to? There's two types of fields. You could have a field which is watered completely by the rain and you don't need to do anything, it'll grow on its own. Or a field which requires watering, it requires irrigation, something like that. Even if it's grown to a stage of shachas, it may not go further. It's a bit more doubtful that it will. It's not going to happen on its own. You're going to have to do it, and oftentimes it won't happen. So there you have the Mechekas Rabbah and Yosef. Rabbah says it has to be a raining field, a field that you don't need to do anything. And Yosef says that even if it's a field, you have to do something. But according to both opinions, it has to be grown to the stage of shachas. So now when we go back to Chanina with the pregnant lady, that the Kiddushin's chal, it has to be, according to both opinions, it has to be hukar ubra. It has to be where the pregnancy is externally visible and the child exists in the world to some significance. If, however, it does not, then it would not be considered significant enough. It's not parallel to the stage of shachas, and neither one would hold, according to this version, that is okay.